The value of radical hospitality or being radically hospitable has been the center of the way that Julie and I have done ministry really for 20 years. And not hospitality in the way that is maybe most commonly known and practiced by having friends over or throwing parties or having a large dinner party of guests from our workplace or that sort of thing, but really the biblical concept of hospitality being rooted in its word, in the Greek word phileoxenia, which is a brotherly love extended to the stranger. And so phrases like there is always room for one more found itself very early on in the idea of what it's like for us to make space for one another. It hasn't always been verbalized, but it's been the essence of our understanding of the ministry of Feed, of outreach to the local jails and prisons, and it's deeply rooted in the parable of Matthew 25. And so it has been expressed historically at DCV through looking at Matthew 25 as the lens by which we consider ministry. So feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, visiting the prisoner, caring for the sick, welcoming the stranger, providing clothes to those who are naked and vulnerable. And so as we've thought about how are those things relevant in our current context and current culture? There have been a number of times in which different ministries have been maybe more significant than others. Feed has always been a primary ministry that the church has embraced, and the consideration of how do we serve the poor with dignity, how do we use those relationships to build into the experience that people have, and that we would, as I've said many times, that we would love the hell out of our city. And that's both kind of there's a double edge to that. We would love well, but the effect of our love would be that people would see the experiences of shame and embarrassment and the mistakes of their lives and the sin that has maybe caused certain cycles and patterns to be freed from. And as a leadership expression, it's really an interesting thing that our hope would be that everyone who is in leadership at DCV has a personal commitment of service to the poor. Now, that may not be through the ministry of Feed. It may not be connected to a direct ministry related to DCV because schedules are complicated, and it's not like everyone can simply show up on a Monday and that works for small group leaders or that works for families with young children, but that each person who would count themselves in leadership would have a personal commitment and service to the marginalized and to the poor, finding regular and consistent habits and routines of serving those who are on the margins, and that as a leader you would find spaces to commit to doing so as a group. Our experience has been if groups do it together, people are more likely to try something that they're uncomfortable with. And in many ways, people are uncomfortable as we get our hands into the messes of the margins of our culture. And so what does it look like for a group to serve together under the impetus of leadership to come and connect to something like Feed or a prison outreach, or connecting to some jail ministries that we have, to going to Common Ground Free Store if that's the place, or people in need if that's the place, and considering what it looks like to do so as a group. Questions that we think might provoke some resistance or surface some resistance is, how does your life reflect the idea that there's always room for one more? Do you think about an open table? Do you think about a chair? I know in our small group at one point we used to always have a chair that was always empty, saying there's always room for one more and there's always room for the Holy Spirit. And it was a visualization of that principle, that there's always room for one more. When is the last time that you shared a meal with a stranger? Somebody who wasn't a friend, who wasn't an acquaintance, and whether that was simply taking them out after church on a Sunday, whether that was somebody from work that was visiting, whether that was somebody brought into your own home. But when is the last time you had a meal with someone who you would count as a stranger? When's the last time that you served the poor, and what did that experience teach you about Jesus, and what did that experience teach you about yourself? And what challenges do you consider do you encounter when you consider finding time or opportunities to serve the poor? As we know, in every way, we make space for what's important. And so as we think about serving the poor, what are the obstacles that might present themselves to you at your stage of life, or with your schedule, with the other priorities and the other ministry spaces in which you might feel like you are already deeply committed? And then the questions that we might invite you to consider that promote curiosity is, what does Matthew 25 actually mean? How does God personify himself with the poor? Is there a space in your weekly or monthly schedule that you see as a window of opportunity? And is there an aspect of those who are on the margins that you have a specific passion for that might not reflect itself in the programmatic ministries of the church? And if so, is that a space that you could bring into into the light, we've recently obviously begun having different conversations and hearing even from Daniel and Lindsay and Jen and Silas around foster care and what might it look like for DCV to embrace the reality of the foster care system, some of its challenges and limitations, and being a church that is friendly to those who are in the foster system, both the kids as well as the families providing care and respite care as well. So think about that and think about this concept of radically hospitable.